So the CDC has come out with phases of how they want to see the vaccines rolled out. We'll talk about the individual vaccines in a second. So you have the 1A group. These were your healthcare providers and first responders. Your 1B group, individuals generally over the age of 65. And then the 1C group are individuals who are at risk due to other health problems of having more severe COVID. That whole list of individuals with MS that I just read off would fit into that 1C category. Um, I think we're going to have to work with our local, health officials to say, well, what does that look like? So are they going to require that you have a letter from your physician, or can you just show up and say, hey, I have MS and I'm over 65, or I have MS and I'm on, or I have walking issues? I think every state and probably every county is going to be a little bit different in terms of how that works. I was talking with the MS Focus folks before we started this, when my wife, who's also a physician, and I went to do our first dose of the vaccine. The facility asked if we were healthcare providers when we set the appointment up. But when we showed up, they actually didn't ask us for anything. We had our medical licenses with us, but they didn't ask to see anything. So I think there's a lot of variation in how the rules are working across the country. So we currently have two vaccines. We have the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. These are a new type of vaccine. These are messenger RNA technologies. I would say when I first saw these coming out, I was not, because humans have never seen a messenger RNA vaccine. I was a little concerned about the new technology, but the more I read about it, and the more I looked at the safety data that was presented to the FDA for both the Pfizer and the Moderna product, the more I reviewed cell biology and understood how messenger RNA works, the more comfortable I became with the technology. So what have been some of the concerns, about the vaccines? One concern we hear is that they will develop so very quickly. Part of the reason the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines were developed so quickly is that they don't require us to culture the virus to make the vaccine. Most vaccines are made from either the live virus, a dead virus, a weakened form of the virus. And so you have to culture and grow a lot of that virus to make the vaccine. These vaccines don't contain the virus itself. They are messenger RNA that is designed to look like the viruses, the COVID's messenger RNA that codes for the spike protein. Messenger RNA is a blueprint for a protein. When our body sees messenger RNA, it says, oh, look, there's a blueprint for a protein. I'm supposed to make that protein. In the case of these vaccines, it's the blueprint for the spike protein on the COVID virus that the virus uses actually to attach to human cells. So that messenger RNA is taken into your cell. It's important to note it doesn't get into the cell nucleus where your DNA lives. So it's on the outside of the nucleus. You transcribe or make that spike protein. The spike protein is then put out into your system. Your immune system sees that spike protein and thinks you have a COVID infection. You don't. You just have that little spike protein circulating around. Your body is now going to make an immune response to that spike protein. It's going to mount both a B cell and a T cell response, and it's going to make memory cells. Now, every time it sees that spike protein in the future, you're hopefully going to mount an immune response and be able to shut that COVID virus down if you were exposed to the real thing. Once you use messenger RNA to make the spike protein, it's gone. So I've heard it compared to Snapchat. So it's, it disappears after use after a certain time. So this is not sticking around for long periods of time. There is no virus, dead, alive, attenuated, in the Pfizer and Moderna products. There was some misinformation about these vaccines potentially affecting fertility. There's nothing in the data to suggest that these vaccines have any long-acting effect on fertility. So the National MS Society did come out with guidance suggesting that the vaccines are safe and recommended for people with MS. I would say probably the only caveat in there is with our B cell therapies, our Ocrevus and Rituxan. Could there be a little bit of a timing issue in terms of when you get the vaccine as it relates to your dose of the medicine? Um, B cell therapies, in theory, could make the vaccine a little bit less effective. What we are recommending is that people try to get their vaccination, their COVID vaccine, either 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after a dose of Ocrevus or Rituxan. I know other MS centers are recommending 3 months in between. To me, our rationale for saying 2 weeks is probably fine. Is if you look at individuals who are on Ocrevus or Rituxan, and they've been on it for a while, their immune system's pretty stable. If we look at their immune markers, they look pretty much the same an hour before their Rituxan or Ocrevus as they do a day after, a week after, 3 months after. So to me, doing it 2 weeks after a dose should be absolutely fine. And I don't want people to lose their place in line. If you have the opportunity to do the COVID vaccine, and you're inclined to get it, I don't want us to hold you up on that and have you miss an opportunity because we're waiting until you're 3 months out from your Ocrevus or Rituxan dose. The side effects that we're seeing with the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, I don't think are anything surprising. Every vaccine known to man is going to have some side effect risk. There are going to be individuals who could have true allergic reactions, and I think we will certainly see that in rare individuals with these vaccines. What most people are experiencing is some arm pain with dose 1 of either the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. You're a little more likely to have side effects after dose 2. So people are having some aches and pains, maybe low-grade fever, headaches. Typically, that's going to resolve within about 24 hours after the vaccination. We have 2 vaccine products that are on the horizon out there. So there is an Astrazeneca vaccine and a Johnson & Johnson vaccine. We don't know the timing on either of these vaccines. Will they still get this sort of emergency use authorization that our 2 current vaccines do? These vaccines are also using a little bit different technology than maybe we've seen with other traditional vaccines. So these vaccines are both using an adenovirus to carry the genetic material into your body. So the AstraZeneca vaccine uses a primate adenovirus. So normally adenoviruses are one of the types of common cold that we can get. So with the AstraZeneca vaccine, it's a primate adenovirus. It's non-replicating. It can't make more of itself. It is carrying a piece of viral DNA. That viral DNA is going to cross the cell nucleus and then sort of make messenger RNA, which goes back outside of the cell nucleus, and then it's very much like the Pfizer Moderna products from there. I'm going to want to see a little more data on that one, and this is just my personal feeling that I would say I want a little more safety data on a DNA vaccine. So although the goal of this DNA vaccine is that viral DNA isn't interacting with our human DNA, we do know that some viruses have the potential to intersperse themselves into human DNA for long periods of time. So again, I'd like to see a little more safety data on the AstraZeneca. I think one of the advantages of the AstraZeneca vaccine is it's a lot sturdier than certainly the Pfizer vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine has to be kept in this super cold situation. The facilities have to buy a special freezer to store that. The AstraZeneca vaccine has much less stringent temperature requirements. And it's only 1 dose versus the 2 doses with the Pfizer and the Moderna products. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is also an adenovirus. This is a human adenovirus. Again, it is non-replicating. It can't make more of itself, and it carries that little piece of messenger RNA, kind of like the Pfizer and Moderna products. They're just using a different method to sort of get it into the system. So both the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca products are live virus vaccines. I know we've traditionally had people with MS avoid live virus vaccines, and it'll be interesting to see what the National MS Society says in their guidance statement on these two new vaccines if they get some sort of approval. These adenoviruses were selected because they should not generate a big, ugly immune response themselves. You want the immune response to be to the viral genetic material, either that DNA or messenger RNA making the spike protein. You don't want your immune system making a big immune response to the adenovirus. So these viruses were selected because they are felt to not generate a big immune response. If that is indeed the case, that shouldn't be a problem for someone with MS. And so if you made me look into the crystal ball and say, do I predict the National MS Society is going to give a green light to these two adenovirus vaccines? I suspect they will. I suspect that they're going to be felt to be safe. We have had a number of people with MS get vaccinated already. Either they fell into the healthcare group or the first responder group or people over the age of 65. I don't have exact numbers for how many of our individuals have been vaccinated. I would suspect it's probably in the tune of 100 or so, and we have not heard of any issues with the vaccines in people with multiple sclerosis. There has been an interesting silver lining to this whole COVID experience. So the company that partnered with Pfizer, BioNTech, to make the Pfizer vaccine, their messenger RNA vaccine, they did release about 2 weeks ago a preliminary animal study of using that same technology, that messenger RNA technology, to create a potential vaccine for multiple sclerosis. So there could be a big silver lining. This messenger RNA technology could represent a huge leap in treatment for a lot of different health conditions, much in the way that monoclonal antibodies with things like Tysabri and Ocrevus and Lemtrada represented a big leap in the way we manage MS and a lot of other health conditions. So that BioNTech MS vaccine is very early. It's only at the animal stages right now. So as many of you know, we are the only animal that gets MS. If we want to study MS in other animals, we have to recreate an experimental version called experimental allergic encephalomyelitis. And so you start with that mouse model. If it works there, then you move on to human trials. So they will be moving into phase 1 human studies with that messenger RNA vaccine for MS. It's been a little hard to find published data yet. I don't think they've put out any peer-reviewed article on that. So I don't know for sure the mechanism of action of that MS vaccine. My suspicion is what they're doing is having the messenger RNA code for a myelin type protein. And what they're doing is having the body then make some of this myelin protein, which is part of what your immune attack is directed against in MS. And what they're shooting for is the concept of immune tolerance. They're teaching your immune system to tolerate something, kind of like getting allergy shots, how you can teach your immune system to not react to, say, ragweed or dog dander by exposing it to low amounts of that, of whatever it wants to attack, just continuously over time, so that you build up a tolerance to that and stop attacking it. So I think that is all that I was going to do in a formal setting. So I know there are going to be a ton of questions. So Casey, why don't we open it up to some Q&A?
Yeah, we've definitely got questions. They started coming in 2 weeks ago by email when we first announced this talk. So we'll get right into them, but let me just let our listeners know. You can ask your question a couple of ways. You can use the chat feature and type in your question, or if you'd like to ask your question live, you can use the raise hand feature. If you are on a mobile device, you will touch your screen and click the More menu, and you will find the raise hand button there. If you are on a computer, you will click Participants, and then you will find the raise hand button at the bottom of the list of participants. So let's start with some of our email questions. Let's see. This one may take some clarification. So Crystal asks, my question is regarding the safety of vaccines for patients that already have a compromised immune system due to their medication for the disease. Do you recommend it for your patients with a compromised immune system, not knowing what the effects may be short or long term? Do you know to what extent people with MS or other diseases on immune suppressing medications will be able to achieve immunity? So can you please first address this idea of people with MS having compromised immune systems? Is that true?
That is so without being on treatment, no, that is not true. So people with MS have an overactive immune system that is picking on something that it shouldn't be picking on. So a lot of people with MS are under the mistaken impression that they have a weakened immune system, when in fact, that's not true. Most people with MS are healthy individuals other than their MS. Certainly there are people with MS who have other health problems, but a common story we hear is, boy, before my MS was diagnosed, if there was a cold going through my family, I was the last person to get it. And that probably speaks to that relatively, hyperactive immune system. Now, when we come along with treatments, we're altering that immune system somehow. So the ideal MS treatment is one that tones down the part of the immune system that's overactive specifically and leaves everything else intact. Some of our drugs do have the potential to mildly immunocompromise people. So one part of her question was, do we feel like the vaccines are safe in a person with a compromised immune system? So if let's say that we're on Ocrevus and we've affected the B cells in the immune system, there's nothing that would make us think that that would make the vaccine unsafe. Could it make it less effective? That's the real question. And so there is some data out there to suggest that some of our therapies, Ocrevus, Rituxan, Gilenya, Zeposia, that those drugs might make vaccines a little bit less effective, but it doesn't make them ineffective. So when we think about our average flu shot each year, in a good year, a flu vaccine is 60% effective. With these Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, we're talking about vaccines that are 95% effective. So even if we just lowered it some, we're still probably doing, pretty good job of protecting people, from COVID. So I think her question is a very fair one in terms of what long-term safety data do we have? We don't really have long-term safety data for any human with these vaccines. Most vaccines, I'm not so much worried about long-term safety data. I'm worried more about the short term. And when we think about a bad vaccine from many years ago, the swine flu vaccine from the 1970s, that vaccine wasn't a health problem because of long-term side effects. It was a health problem because of short-term side effects. Guillain-Barré syndrome, transverse myelitis. These were things that happened usually within 2 weeks of vaccination. When we think about the messenger RNA vaccines and how they work, that messenger RNA, again, it's used, it's gone. So all it's doing is telling your body to make a spike protein, and you're making an immune response to that spike protein. So I think we always want to think about the risks and benefits of any treatment that we're going to pursue for ourselves or for family members or for the MS community. But I think, I'm very comfortable with the long-term safety of this for myself, for my family, and certainly for individuals that I work with.
Our next question is from Carol. She says, an MS neurologist told me that the COVID-19 vaccine is 30% less effective if you're on Ocrevus. Do you think that's true?
I've heard people saying that, so I'm not sure. I think that's a pretty broad statement to make. So just like everyone with MS is not the same, not everyone with Ocrevus is the same. So one of the things that we do in people on Ocrevus or Rituxan is we look at their B cells, we look at their T cells, and we look at antibody production. So we check IgG and IgM levels in our individuals on Ocrevus to show that they can still produce normal antibody levels. I don't, to my knowledge, there's never been a study that has specifically broken out those individuals who have normal antibody production versus those, the small subset of individuals on Ocrevus or Rituxan who might have impaired antibody production. I think people on Ocrevus do need to have immune monitoring done. You know, my rule of thumb is if we are doing anything more than affecting your B cells in your immune system, if we're starting to affect your T cells or your antibody production, we're going to lower your dose. We're going to let those things come back up to normal. So I think it's fair to say that Ocrevus probably does reduce the effectiveness, antibody production some with any vaccine, but I'm not comfortable with that 30% number. And the only other caveat that I would throw in is, you know, when we talk about vaccine effectiveness, it's more than just antibody production. It's what the vaccine does to your T cells. So there's a whole nother line of immunity out there. Ocrevus really should not be affecting T cell function if it's doing what it should be doing. I think as if we had intact T cell function, that may be a whole nother line of immunity that again really shouldn't be affected by the Ocrevus.
Now, you mentioned that in your clinic that you're recommending that people who are on Ocrevus get their COVID shot 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after their injection. Marta asks, should the second dose of the vaccine also be completed 2 weeks prior to taking the Ocrevus?
Good question. So when I say the 2 weeks before, I would like the second dose finished 2 weeks before. So that then backs you up. So there's 3 weeks in between the Pfizer vaccine, the 2 doses, and 4 weeks in between the Moderna dose. So let's say let's say you're doing Moderna. So your second dose I would like in 2 weeks prior to your Ocrevus or Rituxan infusion. So that's then going to back your first dose up, you know, to 6 weeks prior to that dose. Again, these are very rough guidelines, and I think there's a lot of wiggle room within there. And I think we're going to have to look at some of these on a case-by-case basis too. Again, I don't want to take someone's ability to get the vaccine away. If, you know, let's say it was offered, but it's not quite within that time window, I'm probably going to err on the side of them getting the vaccine when they can get it.
All right, switching gears a little bit, we have a question from Tara. What if you had HSCT for MS and got a new immune system? Should you get the vaccine?
So HSCT or hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, you're right. You are cleaning the hard drive and starting all over again. So, and we just had this come up last week. We have an individual who's about 2 years status post HSCT. There's no problem with someone with HSCT getting the vaccine. Now, if you were brand new HSCT, let's say that you were within 2 months, that I would talk to the transplant doctors on that in terms of what timing, because in that setting you're generating a brand new immune system, and they may want you to wait until you're really fully able to mount a good immune response to the vaccine. But other than that, someone with HSCT absolutely should get the vaccine just like anyone else.
Okay, now we have some live questions. When I go to bring you on the line, I'll press the button asking you to unmute, and you'll have to click a button that appears on your screen to unmute yourself. So let's start with Roseanne. Roseanne, let's have your question, please.
Okay, I have secondary progressive MS. I am on no medication right now at all. Do I need to worry about the vaccine or any kind of flare-ups that would happen after the vaccine?
So not to our knowledge. Again, so with secondary progressive MS on no therapy, so the National MS Society would kind of put you into that 1C group, saying that, you know, they would feel like you could have some risk of more severe COVID. That's not been our personal experience. We've had people with secondary progressive MS get COVID, and I don't think in general they've behaved much differently than anyone else. But so that really was the $1 million question with the vaccines is, are they going to make people with MS flare up? Are we going to see such a big immune response that's going to take someone who's reasonably stable and now make you have a pseudo exacerbation because of the immune response. So the National MS Society put together a panel of immunologists and virologists to look at that issue, and their conclusion was they did not think that was a risk. And I would say in our experience, we have not seen that. Yeah.
All right, and our next question is from Yvette.
Yes, I'm new to like 4 years now having relapse MS, and I also tested positive for the JC virus. Is there any worries with the vaccine?
No, so we do JC virus testing, and I would say a lot of our MS folks to help us determine which therapies we think might be best for you. And so what that JC virus antibody test is it's testing for a particular form of the virus. Almost all human adults carry JC virus. It's a virus that just uses us as transportation to get from one person to the other. Most of us probably picked up JC virus during childhood. So what that antibody test is for is to see if you have what we call the neurotrophic form of the virus, which about 50% of adults do. So it's very, very common. It's not a health issue unless you were ever on something that really compromised your immune system. So that wouldn't have any bearing whatsoever on your risk of COVID, your risk of getting sicker with COVID, or how you would do with the vaccine for COVID.
And then our next question is from Ronald. Go ahead with your question.
Question I had was, how long will this vaccine be effective?
That is the $1 million question. So the honest answer is we don't know. So the people who were in the original studies with both the Pfizer and the Moderna and any other vaccine coming down the line, they're being followed very closely. So they're having blood testing done to look at antibody levels and T cell function. It could be 2 years, it could be 3 years, it could be 1 year, it could be something that we end up needing booster doses for. So that is one of those unknown questions that we have. Along with that, another really important question that is unanswered, but we can have theories about what we think the answer is. The studies with these vaccines were not done to show that they prevent transmission. They were done to show that you weren't going to get sick individually. Every other vaccine out there at least reduces the likelihood of transmission. So my feeling is if these vaccines don't reduce transmission from person to person, it kind of defeats the purpose of the vaccine. And then we're just protecting ourselves and not much else. Talking to a lot of virologists, to different experts, everyone that I've spoken to who's an expert in this field feels like these vaccines will reduce the transmission of the virus from person to person.
Question.
Yep, good question.
Lisa,
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Let me get a little louder. Is that better?
Yeah, much.
Okay, our next question is from Lisa. She would like to know regarding the B cell depleting DMTs. She asks, does a person still have B cells 2 weeks after an Ocrevus infusion? And since Kesimpta is given monthly, would the same wait 2 weeks after dosing before vaccinating rule apply? Doesn't it take about 2 weeks for your body to develop the antibodies once vaccinated? So would the next dose have to be delayed? And can I have a titer drawn?
Yeah. All great questions. So once you're up and running with any of these B cell therapies, whether it's the monthly Kesimpta, the every 6 month Ocrevus or Rituxan, really your immune function should be sort of homeostatic. So realize these B cell therapies don't knock out all B cells. So you have immature B cells, which carry the CD20 receptor, which is what all of these B cell therapies are targeting. So you have immature B cells with a CD20 receptor, and then you have mature B cells called plasma cells that make antibodies. You're not touching the plasma cells. So, and we can show that. We can show that you have normal antibody production, when you're on these one of these therapies. So, once you're up and running with treatment, if we do your CD20 or CD19 account, and a lot of times we're doing CD19, even though these drugs are CD20 therapies, because those two receptors generally track with each other, and the CD19 blood test is actually cheaper and more commercially available. So we do 19 to tell us what 20 is doing. Your CD19/20 counts are going to be the same really right before your infusion or your Kesimpta dose as it will be an hour after, a week after, 10 days after. So, this 2-week window that we're talking about is very theoretical. You could argue, well, if my immune function is really the same, right before, could I do my COVID vaccine immediately after? Possibly. So I think we're just being on the cautious side. With Kesimpta, because it's monthly, that gets a little trickier because that 2-week window is going to be a little harder. So you could say, why don't we shoot for your COVID vaccine about 2 weeks in between? And then, so if it was Pfizer, you're going to do then your second Pfizer dose about a week after your next Kesimpta dose. If it's Moderna, you're going to do your second Moderna about 2 weeks. So I think you just have to kind of play it by ear as much as you can. Yes, we can still measure titers, and people propose that as a potential study. Should we maybe be, doing COVID antibodies in people who've been vaccinated who are on one of these B cell therapies? And I would bet someone's doing that study out there to show that you do generate a good immune response after your vaccination.
Lisa had a second question. She said, I've heard from medical personnel that the 2 approved vaccines don't work well in people with autoimmune diseases. Is there any truth to this?
I have not seen anything to that effect. So the good and the bad is the good is I've not heard anything to that effect. So the bad is they didn't specifically study it. So, the reason that the National MS Society had to put a panel together of immunologists and virologists is because there really were not people with MS in the clinical trials for the Pfizer or the Moderna product. So we were left with sort of speculating. So I can't think of any reason why a person with MS would not mount a good immune response. We know from studies of other vaccines in people with MS that they mounted a good immune response. So I would expect it to be the same with the COVID vaccines.
Tammy asks, a doctor told me yesterday that with the current vaccines, we can still get the COVID-19 virus, just not as severe a reaction, but would still be contagious. Is that true?
So, both the vaccines are about 95% effective. So if that's the case, we can say, well, in 5% of people, you could still, get COVID. So when we look at the studies, there were still a small number of people, even with, adequate vaccination, who still got COVID. It was drastically reduced. So there are really 2 reasons we're recommending that people still mask and socially distance even when they've gotten the vaccine. One is that the vaccines are not 100% effective. Number 2 is we did not study that transmission from person to person to show that the vaccines decrease transmission. So worst case scenario, what if the vaccines prevent you from getting sick, but you still have a low viral load if you were exposed? And so even though you're not getting sick, you could still maybe spread it to someone else. Like we said earlier, I think these vaccines are going to reduce transmission, but maybe it's not 100% effective. So that's why we're advising people, even after vaccination, to still do all the things that we're doing right now, the masking and the social distancing, the hand washing, and just general precautions.
Now we have a question from Michelle. She says, I'm very allergic to any kind of fish. Also have had reactions to flu shots. Given what happened to the doctor in Boston, are Moderna and Pfizer vaccines okay for me?
Yeah, so we don't think that shellfish, mercury allergies, would be an issue with these vaccines. The flu reaction could be concerning. So if someone has had a history of a really bad reaction to a typical, a flu vaccine or something else in the past, I'd certainly talk it over with your doctor before you do that, because any vaccine can cause an allergic reaction. It could be that in some individuals, their immune systems just react too vigorously to general vaccines, and maybe we could see the same thing with these COVID vaccines. We know that there have been a small handful of true anaphylactic reactions with these COVID vaccines, and so having a history of a flu vaccine reaction could be an issue. The physician that died, so there was a healthy OBGYN, I believe he was about 40 years of age, who
56.
Developed thrombocytopenia after COVID vaccination. So that's a low platelet count. That is a known side effect of every vaccine out there. So it's rare. Typically, people don't die from that. It's something that can be caught and treated. I don't know the circumstances that led to this gentleman, having such a severe case, but that is a known reaction. Interestingly, the risk of that thrombocytopenia is actually higher with the viral infections than it is with the vaccines.
So our next question is from Glennis. She asks a question about the possible MS vaccine you spoke of as the silver lining to all of this. Will that be geared toward the general population, or will it be for MS patients to stop additional demyelination?
Yeah, so good question. So that would be specifically geared towards the MS population. So you're trying to, again, take someone who has an overactive immune system that's picking on myelin and teach that immune system to not pick on myelin anymore.
So Rebecca says, regarding the vaccines for COVID-19, is there any reason to believe that they cause cancer, or has it just not been looked at long enough?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say it's not been looked at long enough. In my heart, and this is just my opinion, and I think a lot of other healthcare providers feel this way, I'd be shocked if that were the case, if there was a cancer risk. Again, thinking about what that messenger RNA does, it's transcribed, it makes the spike protein, it's gone. It's not affecting your DNA, it's not sticking around. When you look at the other ingredients in the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, I didn't see anything in that list that would make me say, I'm not putting this in my body.
Deborah asks, if my family gets vaccinated, do they then have a viral load that could possibly infect me, the person with primary progressive MS on Ocrevus?
Yeah, so good question. So no, not with these vaccines. Again, there's no virus in these vaccines. So it's messenger RNA that makes your body make the spike protein. So you never have the virus in your body with the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. You're making an immune response to a little piece of protein. You're fooling your immune system into thinking you have the virus. So these vaccines cannot give you COVID. They cannot make you make the virus to give it to someone else. You'll hear cases, and everything is very hyper focused right now. So, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of politics that have been attached to the pandemic, and a lot of strong feelings about the vaccines, and a lot of people very concerned about safety with the vaccine. So every time something comes up, a side effect or a potential side effect, you're probably going to hear about it on the media. You will hear about individuals getting COVID after dose 1 of the vaccine. Realize that the vaccine didn't cause that person's COVID, after dose 1 of your vaccine with either Pfizer or Moderna, 2 weeks after dose 1, you're about 50% protected. So there's still a 50% chance you could get COVID. 2 weeks after dose 2, you're 95% protected. So there's only a 5% chance you could actually get COVID 2 weeks after dose 2.
Rebecca asks, are new strains of COVID going to cause additional vaccines?
Yeah, so you know the frustrating thing with viruses is they mutate, they change. So it's germ warfare. So we're doing our best to, to snuff out the virus, and it's doing its best to survive and evade whatever we're throwing at it. So, there are 3 different mutations out there right now. All of these companies that are making vaccines are testing their vaccines against the mutations. Both the Pfizer and the Moderna do look like they're effective against the mutations. There was some suggestion with Moderna that it might be a little bit less effective with the South African mutation that is out there. We'll need to see what that means in real life. I think the gentleman's question earlier about, how long does this immunity last? It kind of ties into this question too. Are we going to need boosters? Are we going to need to constantly modify our vaccine approach to catch up with these mutations? I think we're just going to have to monitor and see how this, how it plays out. It could end up being that we end up with a situation sort of like the yearly flu vaccine, where we have to sort of make our best guess as to what that mutation is and make the vaccine. One of the huge advantages that we have with messenger RNA technology is that it is very adaptable, and you can make new sort of make new versions of that vaccine very, very quickly, because you don't have to culture the virus to do it.
Michael would like to know, if I have thrombocytopenia, should I get the vaccine?
So if you already have an autoimmune thrombocytopenia, I would ask your rheumatologist what they think. I think they're probably going to give you the green light, again, because that is in the autoimmune camp. So you just have a different autoimmune, sort of wrinkle thrown at you. The risk of thrombocytopenia from a vaccine is exceedingly low, but I would run that one by your rheumatologist, just to make sure that they're okay with that.
And Tammy asks, has there been studies to determine if things such as healthy lifestyle choices, diet and exercise, supplementation, affect risk of COVID or vaccine response?
So I think in general, if you are the healthier you are, through diet, exercise, healthy living, I think we're better able to ward off viruses in general. The things that have been specifically looked at in COVID, vitamin D for sure. So there are studies showing that vitamin D does seem to have some protective effect, and may, in particular, protect individuals from having severe cases of COVID. There are 2 studies that I'm aware of from Europe that looked at hospitalized individuals with COVID and showed that 80% of hospitalized COVID patients had vitamin D deficiency. We should be checking vitamin D levels in the MS community anyway. So I like to think that we're kind of ahead of the curve on this one, that we already had people with MS's vitamin D levels up in a good therapeutic range. Harder to know, when you hear things about zinc, elderberry, things that might have antiviral effects. I certainly don't think there's any harm in using those things. But I would say, just from a hard science standpoint, I think the best data is for vitamin D.
Our next question is from Beth. Beth, you should have a button on your screen asking you to unmute.
Yes.
Go ahead with your question.
My question is, what if you've already had COVID-19 with DMS? Do you need to get the vaccination, or are you immune already?
So that's a great question. So you clearly are immune for a period of time after the COVID infection itself. I will tell you, just anecdotally here, with our team, we have 2 team members who, young, healthy people who got COVID early on in the COVID pandemic. They both got vaccinated still. If it were my family member, I would say still get vaccinated, just because we don't know how long that immunity after COVID lasts for. And there is a suspicion that the immunity that you get from the vaccine may be stronger and longer lasting than the immunity that you might get from the infection itself. Still a lot of unknowns in there. Clearly, there are no safety issues with getting vaccinated after COVID. There was a little bit of a concern. Maybe you would have more aches and pains after, if you'd had COVID. So your system is already primed, so you have some memory cells, and maybe you're going to have more of an immune reaction when you get the vaccine. I've not seen that borne out in real life. And our 2 staff members who had COVID got vaccinated. Their side effects weren't any different than anyone else had.
Question is from Doris. She asks, what are your mask type recommendations?
So your gold standard is the N95 mask. Kind of your next level down from there would be either the KN95 or the KF94 masks. I would say for us here medically, we tend to wear the KN95s. I think it's a nice compromise. It's off of your face. It's comfortable. It's going to give you protection and protect people around you. When you get into the regular surgical masks and the cloth masks, I sort of refer to those as like courtesy masks. So they probably offer you a little bit of protection, but what you're really doing is you're protecting the people around you. So you're not putting out big, particulate, matter that would contain virus. So if everybody in the world wore a surgical mask or a cloth mask, we're all protecting each other. The challenge is when you're out and about, maybe there's someone without a mask on. So I encourage people, if you can get your hands on some KN95 masks, I think it's probably the best of both worlds. It offers you protection. It's reasonably comfortable. If you wanted to be super protected and you're only going out for a short time to the grocery store or something, you're doing the true N95 mask. There are obviously first responders, healthcare providers who wear the N95 mask all day long. God bless them. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world, but that is the highest level that you can get.
Lisa asks, if we all get the vaccine dose number 1 and achieve 50% effectiveness, how long after that can we wait for the second dose to achieve 90+% effectiveness? If the second doses that were going to be reserved for this are now being released so that everyone can get dose 1, what if it takes a long time to get enough vaccine doses manufactured for everyone to get the second dose? Will there be a window that closes for the second dose?
And that's an excellent question. And I would say the UK is doing that experiment right now. So the UK made the decision that they were going to vaccinate large numbers of people who would maybe only get 1 dose and only have 50% effectiveness. And that if you had, their thinking maybe was that it's better to have the whole country 50% protected than 40% of the country 95% protected. I've not seen what that mathematical model looks like to say how they came to that conclusion. I would rather see everyone get 2 doses. I think when you get your first dose, I would ask the facility that's doing your first dose, are you setting enough aside to have a second dose for this? I've heard stories here in Georgia of people having first dose and then they were told by the doctor's office or facility that there was not enough, and that the facility was expecting to get another shipment and it didn't come. And so now there's no second dose. We don't know how long you can go between doses before you maybe lose that effect. My guess would be that it's a long time, that you've kind of primed the pump with the first dose. This is just my gut feeling. I would bet you could go probably 2 or 3 months between doses and still get a good bump with that second dose. But I would certainly ask questions, make sure the facility you're getting first dose is going to have enough to do your second dose if at all possible.
And we had a couple of people ask if you could review what you mentioned about where people with MS are likely to fall in the categories of people who are going to get the vaccine.
So we're putting two pieces of information together to come to this conclusion. So if you go on the CDC website and you look at the phases for rolling out COVID vaccine, you'll see that there's phase 1A, 1B, and 1C. So assuming that you would be in 1A if you're a healthcare provider, first responder. You would be in 1B if you're over age 65, and that's regardless of whether you have MS or not. 1C is for people who have a health problem that would predispose them to having severe COVID if they got COVID. They don't mention in that on that CDC website what those health conditions are. They just say if you have one of those health conditions that would put you at risk for severe COVID, then you're 1C. Now go to the National MS Society website. Look under the National MS Society COVID guidelines. You'll see that they have a list. They say, we think these people with MS are at risk for having severe COVID if they got COVID. And that list was people with MS over the age of 60, people with MS who have a progressive form of MS regardless of their age, people with MS who are male, people with MS who have a disability score of 6.0 or greater. 6.0 means you're using a cane to get around. People with MS who maybe are on one of those B cell therapies. And then the last one was people with MS who have a BMI of over 30. That's a lot of people. So our team, we were talking about that today, and we're thinking, well, that's probably 75% of people with MS that are going to fall into one of those groups. If you're with men right off the bat, that's probably 40% of the MS community right there. But, a lot of us, especially after the holidays, probably have a BMI over 30. So, I mean, that's a lot of people there. So, really you say, well, who's not in that group? Well, thin young women are about the only group that wouldn't fall into that potentially. So yeah, that's how those shake out. So you are in that 1C group, which none of us really knows the timing of when does 1C's number get called to get in line for vaccination. I'm hoping late February, March, soon. I think as time goes on, the states are going to start doing a better job with getting these vaccine schedules rolled out. There's been talk at the federal level of having the National Guard start setting up mobile sites. Some states have done a better job than others. You guys down in Florida, Casey, you've done a better job than we did have in Georgia. I mean, we at one point in Georgia were 50th out of 50 states for how effective we are. I think we're up to now about 35.
And one final question. We've had several people who are just looking for a little bit of a review about the B-cell depleting medications, Ocrevus, Rituxan, Kesimpta, and what is the timing that they should be looking at? How do they know when it's the appropriate time to get the vaccine?
So what we're telling individuals here is, so let's say you had your Ocrevus infusion today, and you now have access to the COVID vaccine. Ideally, I'd like you to go 2 weeks after your Ocrevus Rituxan infusion before you start your Moderna or Pfizer process. Let's say that you have an Ocrevus infusion coming up. Ideally, I'd like you to complete your vaccine process, your 2 shots, 2 weeks before that Ocrevus infusion. Don't feel like this is absolutely written in stone, though. If If your timing doesn't fit exactly with that, talk to your local healthcare team. Again, I'm not sure it's as huge of a deal as we're kind of making it, and I don't want people to stress excessively about that. If you're on the monthly Kesimpta, again, try, if you could, ideally, get your first dose about 2 weeks in between your monthly Kesimpta injections, and then your second one whenever that falls, 3 weeks for Pfizer, 4 weeks for the Moderna.
And it says, when you say 2 weeks, does that mean by 2 weeks before the next dose?
So let's say that you had an Ocrevus infusion scheduled today. I would like you to have your second vaccine dose in 2 weeks earlier from today. So go back 2 weeks in your calendar from today. I think we may be stressing people unnecessarily. If it's a couple of days off on one side or the other, I wouldn't lose much sleep over that. Again, if you look at people on all these B cell therapies, and I can't emphasize this enough, your immune system really is not fluctuating very much. And we do this here every day. We measure people's immune function literally an hour before their dose of Ocrevus or Rituxan. I can guarantee you, if I did their immune markers tomorrow, 2 days later, it's going to look almost identical to how it did right before their infusion. So we may be making a bigger deal about this timing issue than we really have to.
All right. And with that, we are out of our time for today. I want to thank everyone for their many questions. If you missed any part of this teleconference or you didn't catch something that was said, it will be available on the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation's YouTube channel, and it will be replayed on msfocusradio.org. If anyone would like to know about our future teleconferences, you can go to the website msfocus.org, click on publications at the top, and sign up for the Focus on Programs newsletter, which will inform you of all our upcoming presentations. And finally, and most importantly, Dr. Ben, thank you so much for just thorough and helpful coverage of this really vital topic.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you to everyone for joining us. And I look forward to, again, when we can do this in person and we'll have this, just hopefully a bad memory behind us.